It's time for Football at 4 with Geoff Mosher.
My personality is I want to win badly. I want to win more Lombardis for Philadelphia and our fans. We got the greatest fans around, and I will do everything possible.
Powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. It drops tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. with the latest on the NFL draft. Draft coverage here on the Sports Bash is brought to you by GMS Law. Make the right call with 4 convenient locations to serve you. GMSLaw.com. Geoff Mosher is here for today's edition of Football at 4. I do want to kick things off with the trade that was made in the NFL, Geoff, and Teddy Bridgewater's 6th-round pick. Someone just said the Eagles should have done that trade. I don't think the Eagles want it to I don't think they want to have someone that's going to push Ertz. I think they want someone to just be there as a backup to Ertz. But that being said, do you think it affects – you could give your comments on that if you'd like to, but do you think that changes anything at 9? Does it make things more, possible for a trade? How do you kind of read into the trade there?
Well, did the person mean that the Eagles should have done that a lot earlier than paying for Joe Flacco as far as getting a quarterback on the cheap? Because why would you go get Bridgewater if you already brought in Flacco for the reasons you're saying as to be a backup?
Right. I think it was more, hey, for a 6th-round pick, if you waited and you could have made this trade, I would rather this than what you did with Flacco.
Sometimes you don't know who's available, right? And sometimes people become available at different times. So I don't know that necessarily that deal was on the table a month ago when Joe Flacco signed. So we'll hard to comment on that. As far as the trade itself, though, not great news, I would think, for the Eagles because the the Denver Broncos, who picked 3 ahead of them, now seem to be in a position where they're probably not going to take a quarterback. And now you look at them, I originally thought that they would be a team that would be ripe to take Justin Fields if he was there. Now you look and think, well, where's the value there at 9? Cornerback certainly could be there. And 8, 9, 10, Panthers, Broncos, Cowboys, that's kind of ripe cornerback market. And so if you're Howie Roseman right now, you're a little concerned, maybe even a little bit more than you were before this trade.
Yeah, and the one question I would have is if they're at 9, they now have Bridgewater, are they more inclined to move back and say, all right, we have a quarterback. It's not a necessity for us to get baseball one. Team. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, I think that 8-9 area is the Panthers too, right? They're picking at 8, and they traded for Sam Darnold. So, Justin Fields is on the board. You're a team like, let's just say New England, right? You want to move up. You're probably talking to Detroit now at 7 to try to get that quarterback ahead of You're probably talking to either of those teams, the Panthers or the Broncos, about moving up. And that theoretically could then push a team that would take a cornerback down. So theoretically, yes, that might help them in that regard.
All right.
But again, everybody wants to trade up and everybody wants to trade down. I mean, there's got to be the value has to be there, and the team has to be able to be willing to give up enough to move up.
Yeah, everybody wants to get the guy that they want. So who is the likeliest candidate of guys that the Eagles want at 12?
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes down to it, we had it in our Inside the Birds mock draft the other day. If the Eagles could get their hands on J.C. Horn, I think they'd be pretty happy about that. He fills not only a need, but even a best player available at 12 type pick, because anybody, who I've talked to in the league says that Patrick Surtain, J.C. Horn, you can put them 1A, whoever you want. They both have different kind of traits, but they're both very, very good. And because cornerbacks tend to go pretty early, you want to get one while you can. So they're all. There's nobody I've spoke to who feel like these guys are overhyped, overrated, shouldn't be top 12, shouldn't be top 15, and maybe could be top 10 type picks. So it meets the need and the value there. So J.C. Horn is certainly a guy that, and I think Surtain still might go off the board before him. If not, if J.C. was there, Surtain was there, I think that's still a player that the Eagles would really have their eyes on. If both of those guys are not there, I sense that Rashawn Slater would be a player on that's high on their list, offensive line and the fact that they've got 3 offensive linemen north of 30, 2 of them who are well north of 30, and Slater can play multiple positions. After that, you got the 2 Alabama wide receivers. I know the Eagles do like them as far as what they bring to the table. It's not necessarily a position that Eagles value a lot at that position historically in the first round, but you can't deny their talent. And of course, you can't have the conversation if all these guys are gone, which is, by the way, possible, of a pass rusher, and Kwity Paye would kind of fit the bill there.
No doubt. Geoff Mosher, Football Fort, powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, Sal Powell was on Friday's show. He said something that kind of raised some eyebrows, I thought. I want to get your take on this, and then it's a little draft-related as well, but kind of big picture-related. Take a listen.
They don't want to take shortcuts, meaning build from the inside out, stay to the core values that they had when they drafted Fletcher Cox, they drafted Lane Johnson, they drafted Brandon Graham, they drafted Jason Kelsey, who are the cornerstones of the trenches of the football team.
The point he was making with that, and I could play the other part of that, was that he said inside the NovaCare Center, they think this.
The feeling that I get in talking to people on background in NovaCare is that they feel like they can compete in the division this year, that they're not that far away. And, truth be told, won 4 games. The Washington football team won 7 and won the division.
Right.
So there's a difference of 3 games.
So they don't feel they're that far away, but don't take a shortcut, meaning, does that to you mean let's not take a wide out, let's not get cute, let's stick with what we know, let's get an offensive lineman, or as you just said, Kwity Paye, let's go defensive lineman. They are the money positions, the offensive line, the defensive line. That's where this team has been built when they've been successful.
Yeah, I mean, in fairness, for as long as I've been covering the team, I can't remember, and there have been down years. It's not like they're in the playoffs every single year. I can't ever remember a time that the organization felt that they were going into a year where they didn't see a chance to compete, right? So they should feel like they can turn it around quickly or they can compete, because the division has been a carousel for quite many years, right? I mean, there's always, what is it? How many straight years has it been since that we haven't had a division champion repeat? I think since 2004, right? The Eagles in 2003 and 2004. So that should tell you that every team in the NFC East should feel like it's got a shot to compete. And of course, there's talent. Every single NFC East team has a decent enough amount of talent to feel that way if they get that player that can push them over a hump, whether it's a quarterback or a pass rusher or a lineman. The Eagles do like to build from the inside out. Doesn't mean they always take from the inside out. I mean, Andy Reid did draft Lito Shepherd in the first round at one point. So, I mean, that's why I sit here and tell you, if those 2 corners aren't here, you have to consider Rashawn Slater if he's there, because of the value that they put on the line, and I know that they like him.
Right, and I guess, like, off that, like, if someone if the people in the front office are like, look, we're not as far off as people think. If we just, let's stick with our core values. Let's get that to me, that statement, like, if their mindset is that they're not as far. Now, if your mindset is, look, we're not close this year, let's start doing this. Maybe they waddle off. Well, I say waddle off, but maybe they go off and get a guy like Waddle, right, and say, look, let's get a weapon. But if they think that they have a shot, maybe that indication is, all right, we're not that far out of this thing. Let's get a lineman. Let's play it safe. Let's go down that direction, which would bring us to, if they trade up.
Well, real quick, though, just to respond to that, I wouldn't look at Jalen Waddle if they had drafted him. Let's say J.C. Horn's on the board and they still took Jalen Waddle. I wouldn't interpret that as a sign that they were getting cuter or that how they feel about where they are. I would like to interpret that is that they just felt that he was better as the best player available than the guys that were also on the board in that category. So I would like to think that you don't read into their first round pick as where they think they are on the competition scale, and it should just be, are we getting the best player for our team and our fit and our identity?
Geoff Mosher, Inside the Birds podcast. If they trade up, who's in the mix?
If they trade up, you would think it's because maybe there's some concern that at where they are, you're not. I've done some many permutations. I'm sure everybody has. There's a chance that Slater, that Horn, that Surtain, and Waddle are all gone by 12. There really is. It could happen. Even Devontae Smith as well. Throw him in that mix. So if they trade up, it's because there's two things involved, right? It's because the cluster after that, they don't have valued as upper first round material. Meaning, like, I've spoke to two teams, right, about how many prospects they have considered first round talents. It's very rare, Mike, that teams see 32 first round picks or more. What often happens is you get about 15 to 18 players that you say these are first round talents. And unfortunately, teams that pick from 20 to 32 often have to take a player that they see as a second round talent, but just because there's no first round talents left, that happens pretty much every year. So in fact, one team told me that they've got 15 first round talents. Another team told me had 18 first round talents. So the point I'm trying to make here is at 12, if a lot of the guys that we just talked about who have first round talent grades start to go, and how he's looking at there and seeing a cluster of guys that he doesn't think are worthy of being picked 12, they don't value there, then he may feel like I've got to jump up and get that guy. And I also don't think you can discount. I said this to you the other day, right? I said, look, I think the Eagles are out of the quarterback business because they traded out of 6, right? I still feel that way, but I can't discount the fact that we don't know what San Francisco is going to do. They could take Trey Lance and not make Mac Jones. They could take Mac Jones, not Trey. They could take Justin Fields. And then all of a sudden, one of those guys starts to go down and down and down. And then you have to wonder, do the Eagles bite on that? I don't know, but I think you have to wonder. I never really thought Justin Fields would be there at 10 or 11 or 12. But now that you see these moves getting made and Denver picking up a quarterback, starting to think, well, maybe he will. Yeah, maybe that tantalizes Howie.
I like this one because Jalen says, Jeff, some reports today, maybe BS, the Dolphins would actually go Waddle over Chase. If that happens, is that a scenario where then Howie says, I got to get to 7?
You know what? I'm going to say this. Anything can happen. We know that. I mean, last year showed us that. But for the Eagles to move up and give up draft capital, do I think they would do that to take a wide receiver? I can't. And I'm just going by their history, their valuation of positions. I'm not saying they wouldn't take one at 12 because he's the best player there and other guys are gone, but I don't know if they're moving up and giving up capital to take a wide receiver. I also don't know that realistically Jamar Chase is going to get within reach, right. but for the sake of the argument,
that's the BS meter that we said all week long. We've got to have the BS meter on almost all the time because all of this stuff is going to be thrown out there on the last day before the draft. All right, let's get into this. Couple things with the current roster. Zach Ertz. I know Adam and you guys talked about this on a recent podcast. Will he be moved tomorrow?
I don't know tomorrow, but I'd be shocked if he wasn't moved by the end of the draft. So we'll see what happens. Again, moving tomorrow is like saying, does he have enough value as a second or a third rounder to really get you up into the draft? Or is he part of a package that helps you? It's not out of the realm of possibility. I don't know if you can discount the idea of Howie maybe using as much capital as he has accumulated over the last for this year and next year and trying to maybe move back, into the first round, late first round, and get another player that he might like. And certainly Zach Ertz could be a part of that trade, but I do imagine he'll be traded before the end of the draft.
All right. Anybody else on the current roster that could also be moved? Because everybody just assumes Ertz. Is there somebody else on this roster?
Well, I would keep my eye on Andre Dillard. Again, you're looking for a guy who, we know that he's going to have to compete to start over Jordan Mailata. And we've said this a lot. Jordan Mailata is going to be your left tackle going into the offseason program because he deserves it. And that's no knock on Andre Dillard, but Jordan Mailata played well when given the chance and showed he has a lot to build on. And you have not seen that even in the limited resume that Andre Dillard has put out there. And so if you are Howie Roseman, and you know that teams are always looking for offensive linemen, and someone's willing to take Andre Dillard in some kind of package, right? And that helps you spice up to move up in any round to get a real good player. I'm not talking like, in the 6th round, you trade Andre Dillard in the 6th round pick to get a better 5th round pick. Obviously, I'm talking about day 1 or day 2. Then I could see that happening.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Dillard, I know, was a first-round pick. I don't know what they think of him or what to think of him. I mean, he didn't play last year. I mean, he played very sparingly. I feel like a lot of Eagles fans remember the night he played right tackle and just was abysmal, and then his answer wasn't great, that he didn't really want to play right tackle. But at left tackle, he handled himself okay. He wasn't, Jason Peters in his prime out there, but he wasn't abysmal at left tackle. He wasn't very good at right tackle, and I think that's what Eagle fans remember the most. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on as well then. All right, what are we hearing about the number of actual first-round talent there is in this particular draft? In other words, if you were to trade back, how far is the depth in the first round?
Like I said, there's not going to be 32 first-round players. There's some pretty good players, though, that could be there, mid to late first round, pass rusher of some sort. I'm curious to see where Kwity Paye goes, because he is a guy that the Eagles like, but, he might not be what they want at 12. And if you look at kind of the teams after the Eagles pick, like the Chargers, the Vikings, Patriots, Cardinal, I'm just not sure. Either it's a 3-4 scheme, and I don't see Paye as a 3-4 linebacker, or it's a team that's just going to value offensive line, like I think the Vikings and the Chargers would, or maybe even explosive wide receiver. And so you could see Paye fall down the draft. You could see a good offensive lineman, Elijah Vera Tucker, for example, fall down because maybe some other tackles or players were targeted. So I always have to keep your eye on good play. We see this every year, right? How many times do we see players, not just in the first round, but then, whether it's Metcalf going all the way to the second? I mean, last year, who was the play? I forget. There's like one or two guys every year that you thought were going to be top 10 picks that are there from 20 to 32, and then teams try to do something to get him, or just the team sits there and capitalizes.
Hey, conversely, Geoff, there's that guy that's always taken in the first round, and you're like, nobody had him in the their mock draft in that first round. I mean, who was the guy that the Saints traded off? Was it?
Oh yeah, Isaiah Davenport, right?
Marcus Davenport,
exactly. I'm sorry, Marcus Davenport. Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there is an Isaiah Davenport, but I'm not. That might be a different sport.
Right. Where you're just kind of like, whoa, he wasn't on anybody's radar. So that's out there too.
Right.
Round 2, 37. So if you're saying, okay, there might not be 32 first-round talents, is the second-round depth, what areas, prospects are they likely to target with that second-round pick? Is that predicated on what they do in round 1?
Well, you hope not, but you just never know. But there are certain positions that offer good depth in this draft, right? Offensive line is one. There are going to be some pretty good interior offensive linemen, and also some good guard/tackles. A guy like Dylan Raduns from North Dakota State, a guy like Jackson Carman from Clemson, who can play guard or tackle. There'll be some pretty good Landon Dickerson. Now he's from Alabama.
Oklahoma.
And Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He's really good, but he has a long history of concussions. So he's probably a first-round talent who's going to slide. If it's not concussions, it's injuries. I know that. He's had multiple injuries all throughout his college career. So I know people love his play style, his tape, but they're very concerned about the medicals with him. And so he's a guy that might, be there in the second or third round. And I think there'll be some wide receivers who you hear may go first, but not. If they don't, they'll be there. When the Eagles pick high in the second, maybe a Rashad Bateman, perhaps a Terrace Marshall. As an example, the kid from Ole Miss who's really short but fast as heck, Elijah Moore is another one. So I know the Eagles like offensive linemen. They like to draft offensive linemen, and of course, if they wind up moving Dillard in a trade, they're going to want to have more depth on the offensive line. So like I said, some of those names wouldn't surprise me if they were targeting there in round 2.
All right, I saw a mock draft today, a 7-round mock draft that I thought was interesting. They had 7 of the 11 picks were on the defensive side of the ball. Now, who they took is inconsequential, but that mindset was kind of interesting, that 7 players, they went defense. One of them, though, was a quarterback. So, in your mind, where is that quarter? They're going to get a quarterback, right?
We've talked about that a lot on Inside the Birds, the idea of drafting a developmental quarterback. Good teams do it, every few years or so. The Eagles did try to do that just 2 years ago with Clayton Thorson, and it didn't pan out very well, as we know. So it's possible, but I got to tell you that the returns I get on some of these guys, so Kellen Mond and Kyle Trask and Davis Mills, I don't even know, because those guys might get like kind of overdrafted on they might be round 2, round 3 guys. I'm thinking Eagles might be looking 4, 5, 6, like a Jamie Newman perhaps, or Ian Book, right, from Notre Dame. So that's where I would look if I'm trying to figure out what the Eagles are doing. But I got to tell you, even though it's obvious when you're talking about a day 3 quarterback, you're not going to get great feedback. I get kind of less than ideal feedback on some of those guys too. So it may be the year where you're like, you know what, it's just not even a good developmental quarterback class. But we'll see.
The guy that they had going in this mock draft was Felipe Franks, who played at Florida and then transferred to Arkansas. 6'6", big dude, 68% of his completion, runs a little bit, but the Florida connection's kind of interesting there. So I think it was in the 6th round they took Felipe Franks. I said, man, who even remembers that guy when he transferred? He went to Arkansas and just kind of fell off the map. All right, a couple more with Geoff Mosher from the Inside the Birds podcast. The medical character stuff. Can't get him in the building. How is that being kind of compared to years past? How are they figuring that out?
I think this is going to be a really interesting first round, Mike, or an entire draft, because the feedback I keep getting talking to people from NFL teams is that the limited time that they've been able to have real up close and personal time, because remember, there's no visits to the NovaCare. All the interviews are done through Zoom, and there's a restriction. It's not like you can be like on Zoom with Devontae Smith for 5 hours. There's a restriction for how much each team can do that. And then, of course, a lot of teams aren't getting the medical evaluations that they would normally get when you bring it into your house, and not everybody showed up to that recheck at Indianapolis. So I've been told, and look, you just never know, but I'm not saying it's groupthink, but I know some teams have taken more guys off the board than normally this year, or put them in that high risk. Some teams just do it by risk, like low risk, moderate risk, high risk. You'll see players in high risk that teams are going to be scared off from. Like I mentioned, Landon Dickerson, right? Good example, because of the injuries and for some guys' lack of information. And that's a lot. I mean, that's stuff we never hear about. Remember last year that Jerry Jeudy was supposed to be a top 5 pick, top 7 pick, and then 2 days before the knee thing came out, and he wound up slipping to Denver pretty lower than, and it wasn't even the first receiver taken in the draft. So a lot of guys you don't even know about have these surgeries in the past and injuries that they've had to deal with that's going to impact their draft status.
Yeah, and I mean, the Farley thing, I think, is another guy to keep an eye on. He got COVID now.
I think guy has no luck.
Right, exactly. All right, last thing for Moshe, because this is his last appearance for Football at 4 for the week. So your strongest and weakest positions in this draft class are?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a lot of offensive tackles going the first 2 rounds, I believe. So that's fairly strong there. I mentioned the interior offensive linemen, pretty good. Linebackers. Now, I'm not saying that there are studly guys. There's going to be 8 first-round linebackers, but there's good depth there. You're going to see a lot of linebackers going day 2, day 3, and slot receivers. I mean, there's a ton of these little guys, like these Tutu Atwells, and I mentioned Elijah Moore. There's just a lot of vertical slot receivers, I'll say, that people like in this year's draft.
All right.
And you ask weaknesses, right?
Yeah, who are the weak guys?
After the first few corners, there's a pretty big drop-off there. Defensive tackle. One team told me it is, quote, by far the worst defensive tackle class it's ever seen, or at least in recent history. That's pretty strong. And I would say, Najee Harris and Travis Etienne are good running back prospects. The North Carolina kids are too, but after maybe the first 4 or 5, gets pretty iffy really quickly there.
All right, Geoff Mosher, I know you're not on tomorrow, so give us how you think it will play out tomorrow for Philadelphia.
Oh, man, you're asking me to be predictable for this team. I mean, look, if they had their druthers and J.C. Horn is there, I think that's a pretty solid pick for them. If it's Surtain, I think that's solid too, and we'll see what happens. There's such a wild card, Mike, from 7 to 9 right now that it's almost impossible for me to make a guess. But I do feel like if it's going to be the year for corner, this will be the year.
All right, so you're going J.C. Horn or Surtain, whatever one is in that spot at number 12. All right, Geoff Mosher at Geoff Mosher NFL, the Inside the Birds podcast at Inside Birds. Tomorrow morning, check that out, and all their content that has led up to the draft this week. And what are you guys doing for the draft tomorrow?
Well, we will be at Evil Genius in Fishtown. It'll be myself, Adam Kaplan, and Greg Cosell. We've got a 2-hour show from 5:30 to 7:30 p.m. You can still reserve some seating if you want to show up, but if not, just watch us on our Inside the Birds platforms, our our YouTube channel, our podcast platform. 2 hours of preview, and I know we'll have some intel for everybody.
Great stuff. As always, Geoff Mosher. Tomorrow, Andrew DeCecco will give his mock draft finale and pick here on the Sports Bash, and Adam Kaplan will recap round 1 and preview round 2 and 3 on Friday's show. All right, Moshe, enjoy the draft, man.
Thanks, bro.